I love worship. I just love worship. I remember several years ago, I was walking around down here by the lake at Township Park, and I've always just loved worship. And I remember saying, God, don't you think you forgot something? Don't you think you forgot to give me a voice to sing with? Because I love worship. I would love to do that. And I think you forgot that element because you gave me the heart for it. And you know, it's funny, I love how Israel, when God did amazing things for Israel, they'd set up pillars. You know, they'd set up a stone as a reminder as to where God showed up and where they saw God. And I can remember exactly where I was, on the exact spot of the street. And I said to the Lord, I said, God, I'm just going to ask you for something crazy. I'm going to ask you to give me a voice. Just suddenly I'm going to have the voice to lead worship. Would you do that? I would love that, and I'm going to believe for that. What didn't happen? So what do you do with that? Well, I'll tell you what God did with that. Kay and I have four children, and each one of them has their gifts and their abilities, and especially with my two sons, the loves of my life, I see them living out in their lives now, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But it was shortly after that prayer when I walked down to the house, and Matt's oldest brother's name is Andrew, lives between LA and San Diego now, but I asked Kay, I said, well, where's Andrew? And she said, well, he went up to worship practice at the church. We're going to a church up the street here at the time, and he said he went up to worship practice up there, and I thought, well, that's all right, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. And pretty soon he was going up there all the time, and then before I knew it, he was trying out for the worship team. They had him sing, and he came home, and I said, well, her name was Candy. I said, what did Candy say? And she said, sound pretty good. They're going to use me as a backup singer. And so before I knew it, now Andrew I've always played guitar in my life a little bit, but Andrew had started to pick up the guitar, and he just started messing around with it. And he didn't take any lessons or anything like that, but pretty soon I noticed that he was just playing stuff at home, and it was like, where's this coming from? You know, it was really good. And then the next thing I knew, his guitar was going to worship practice. And then before I knew it, the time came where Andrew was leading worship at Cornerstone up the road. And that guy has an amazing voice. Some of you have heard it. And I remember one of the first times I heard him sing, and I can barely, oh boy, and I can barely keep the emotions in check now. Oh wow, this is amazing. You know, Brian, I saw that God he answered my prayer, but he answered it in a different way. And I thought that day, and I remember thinking, how wise of God. How wise of him to do something like that. Because if, you know, a guy certainly get a little bit older at that time, but, you know, if God could give that gift to me, or say I'm going to give it to your son, guess what I would have chosen? I would have said, give it to my son. Give it to my son. God gave that gift about the same time I prayed for me to get that gift. Right around the same time, Andrew suddenly developed this interest in worship. And I'll tell you what, I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. That guy could sing and play, and he never took lessons. It's incredible. And I just want to say, sometimes God will answer your prayers a little bit different than you're expecting. But he is faithful, and he is just, and he is righteous, and he is true. So you keep your eyes on him. Because if the answer doesn't seem to come right away, it's okay. You just keep pressing into him. God has your back. God has your best interest at hand. And so God may sometimes choose to answer your prayer a little differently than you prayed. Somebody needs to hear that today. I'm not sure, because that was not part of the message. So somebody needs to hear that today. Hold on to God when you pray, because the answer is coming, and if it comes differently, trust God, because He has something better planned for you than what you had planned for yourself. Somebody needed that today. How far will the love of God go to find you, to get a hold of you? How far will God's love go? What can you do, or what have you done to where you've wondered, how can God love me? And where will God go after that? You know, first, before I really get into that, and how this message came about was through prayer. We talked about that last week. What we did, friends from South Carolina last week, we looked at the Gospel of Luke, and we talked about how Jesus continually withdrew himself to pray. And Jesus often did that after there was a big event, after a lot of healings, or after he fed the 5,000. You know, when the religious leaders were getting ready and plotting to kill him, Luke says more times than any other gospel, it talks about how Jesus withdrew to pray. And the question, I can't remember if I said it exactly like this last week, but you know, the question I posed even today is, and who do we think we are if we have a shallow prayer life? If Jesus needed to pray like that, who do we think we are that we can just get by with a little bit of prayer here and there and a morsel of prayer here and there? And who do we think we are? So I really challenged our church family to really pray this week. And I said before I ended, before I go to bed tonight, I am going to ask God to interrupt your sleep. And I heard some moans. And I heard some groans. And this week, I have faced a lot of criticism for that prayer. I have heard that people were up at all times of the night praying, and I'll tell you what, if you think I have sympathy for you, you're wrong. I'm going to pray for a double portion of interruptions, if that's what it takes. But this is the thing, we develop a prayer life. So, I also was woken up this week. I want you to know that I didn't escape. In fact, I remember saying to the Lord at one point, I said, Lord, I pray that you would interrupt their sleep, not mine. But it happened, and that's good. I enjoy that. I told you I enjoy that. But anyway, yesterday morning was one of those mornings. It was 4:33 in the morning. I suddenly opened my eyes. I looked to see what time it was. And this is a weird thing. I'm trying to figure out what the connection is, or if it's just, or if God is doing something. But the times when I know that God is waking me up to pray, and it's time for me to get up and pray, there's usually a number 3 in the time. And I can't explain that yet, but I'm going to pray into it. But I've noticed that there's usually 1, 3, sometimes 2, and once in a while I see 3:33. So I'm saying, Lord, okay, what is it with these 3s? I woke up yesterday morning at 4:33, and I knew it was time to get up and pray. I just knew it. I was still pretty tired. And I figured what would happen, because I was really tired, is that I would fall back to sleep while I pray. Something else that I encourage you, that's a good thing to do. We joke about how we fall asleep when we're praying, but there's nothing better than to fall asleep while you're praying. I went out and I got by our sofa. That's my spot. And I knelt down by our sofa, and I knew that I would probably fall asleep, and it happened. And I really don't know how long I prayed, but I started to pray, and when I opened my eyes, it was 5:30. And I knew it was time to get up. But something strange was going on. Not strange, there's something I couldn't quite put my finger on why this particular song was chosen. But when I woke up, I could hear a hymn going through my mind. It was just playing very clearly in my mind. And it's a hymn that growing up, we didn't sing a lot in church, and I didn't hear it a lot, but I would hear it occasionally, I remember. And Debbie, I looked in our hymnal, and the love of God I don't think is in there. But it was the love of God. How many of you are familiar with the hymn, The Love of God? Yeah, well, I'm not going to sing it. You know, when it's time for worship, I make sure that this gets pushed into the off position. Because if I didn't, you guys would say, we'll come back later. So, the love of God. So I went back to bed, and I thought, well, I'm going to get a little more sleep. I was still tired. And but when I was trying to sleep, I couldn't go to sleep because the love of God was going through my mind. I'm telling you, I sang the love of God not a whole lot in church in my life, and I only remember hearing it a couple of times. So it was amazing to me that this hymn, the love of God, was going through my mind. And when I did get back to sleep and I woke back up, I was still hearing the love of God. And I knew in that moment what God was saying, and He said, I want you to talk about this hymn tomorrow. But I didn't understand why. Well, we don't have to understand why when it comes to God. We just do what God says. And I remember saying, God, it doesn't, I looked up the lyrics and I thought, those are nice lyrics and everything, but what's so special about this song or this hymn over other hymns? And I didn't understand that. But I Googled the lyrics, and I feel I need to read them to you because I knew God was saying to read, but then I found out why. I found out why God brought this hymn and was playing this hymn into my mind. The love of God is greater far than tongue or pen can ever tell. It goes beyond the highest star and reaches to the lowest hell. The guilty pair bow down with care. God gave His Son to win. His erring child He reconciled and pardoned from his sin. O love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forever endure, the saints and angels' song. When hoary time, you know what that means? I even remember saying to God, God, we don't even talk this way anymore. When hoary time, do you know what hoary is? I had to look it up. Hoary is aged. You know, it's like an aged condition or an old condition. So when aged time or old time, when hoary time shall pass away and earthly thrones and kingdoms fall, when men who hear refuse to pray, on rocks and hills and mountains call, God's love so sure shall still endure, all measureless and strong, redeeming grace to Adam's race, the saints and angels' song. O love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure, the saints and angels' song. Could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry, nor could this scroll contain the whole, through stretched from sky to sky. O love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure, the saints and the angels' song. A nice hymn. It wasn't a hymn I would have chosen. I would have chosen a hymn like How Great Thou Art. Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus, a hymn that will be sung at my funeral one day. Great is Thy faithfulness, holy, holy, holy. I love those. I wouldn't have picked that, but God picked this particular hymn. As I scrolled down, I began to see the story behind the song. And when I read the story behind the song, I said, Lord, I get it. The song was written in 1923 by a man named Frederick Lehman. He was born in Germany in 1868, and he died in Pasadena, California in 1953. He migrated with his family to Ohio at age 4 and came to Christ at age 11. There was a time when he was walking down a country lane, and he wrote, I looked this up in his words, that a cornucopia of glory descended all around him. Now, well, what is that? So I looked that up, and that is an abundance of things around, plenty and overflowing with beauty. And in his words, he describes how he was walking along a row of trees, and they just seemed to begin to glow, and everything around him began to glow, and this amazing, overwhelming peace just came over him. But he talked of that experience. The weight of conviction was gone, and praise was upon his lips. Now, he went on to study to be a minister at Northwestern College in Illinois. He pastored in Iowa, Indiana, Kansas City, Missouri also. His first hymn was written in 1898. He published hundreds of songs, compiling 5 songbooks. In 1911, he moved to Kansas City, where he helped found the Nazarene Publishing Company. He married Emma Dermeyer, and they had 8 children. So he went into business. And you would think that everything was going to be great. This man was writing hymns, he had his own publishing company, but some business reverses caused him to where he had to get back into manual labor to put food on the table and provide for his family. He ended up taking a job in Pasadena, California with a packing company. They packaged up oranges and lemons, and that's what he did. And the labor was pretty hard. They drove them pretty hard. So here was a man, keep this in mind, that had gone from being a pastor and studying to be in the ministry and having his own publishing company to now working at this packing place. But one Sunday night, he was in a revival, or maybe it was a Sunday evening church service, I don't know. But he was so taken back by the service and the message that was given that his heart began to burn and stir, and that was the time that he wrote The Love of God. He was going to work the next day, and he says what was the word? Basically, when the boss wasn't looking, he would take time to sit down on a crate, and he began to just scribble some things down and write some things down. But he would do this, he did this, and throughout the day he pretty much came up with the first 2 stanzas in the song. He went home, his daughter helped him with the music, and he had these first 2 verses. He wrote the first 2 verses. If you remember that song, there's a 3rd verse. Back in those days, you had to have 3 verses to a song for it to really be considered a song. It's not like today where 5 or 6 lines can be considered a song. So he needed a 3rd verse, but a 3rd verse hadn't come to him. That 3rd verse was this: could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry, nor could this scroll contain the whole through those stretched from sky to sky. He had written the first 2 verses. He suddenly remembered a poem that was written and had been handed to him. And he ran to get that poem. And when he looked at it, he knew that this was going to be the 3rd stanza. Why do I highlight this? And why do I talk about this? And I'm going to ask you the question again. How far will God take His love to find you? And there's somebody today that needs to hear or be reminded of this. How far will God's love go to pursue you, to chase you, to romance you, to draw him to himself? The last stanza was found etched on a wall by a patient in an insane asylum who had passed away. But the guys in charge, after they had carried him out, and they were in charge of fixing up the room, they saw this poem written on his wall. The third stanza to this song came from an insane asylum. A patient had written and etched on the wall. How far will we go to reach someone with his love? And I read that and I thought, I get it. I understand it now, why you have given me this hymn to talk about. Now, it goes even further than that. The patient who wrote this on the wall was not the patient who wrote it. This initial poem was written in around 1050 by a Jewish rabbi, not even in the English language. Throughout the years, somehow it got translated into English. And somehow this patient in the insane asylum, it came to him, or he remembered it, or whatever God did, I would say, a miracle in that asylum. But however it came to him, this is the stanza that came to Lehman when he needed a third stanza for that. And here's the amazing thing. That when this poem, not written in English, was transcribed into the English language, it fit perfectly the rhyme and the rhythm into this hymn. It fits right in there like as if he wrote it. I'm amazed by the love of God, how deep and wide it is. I'm also amazed, guys, that I had no idea of this story, but I'm amazed that God, the God of love, would wake a guy up in Madison, Ohio at 4:33 in the morning to learn about this so that we all could understand the love of God and be reminded of how far the love of God will go, even into an insane asylum. The Apostle Paul puts it like this. It reminds us of that never-ending, far-reaching, reckless love of God. And as much as I love the New King James, I'm going to read this from the New Living Translation. I love how it just simplifies it and brings it out. And I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons. Neither our fears for today nor our worries about tomorrow. Not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. No power in the sky above or in the earth below. Indeed, nothing in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus our Lord. Now for the Here's Hope family that goes here all the time, they know I'm always saying, guys, I'm just being real. And I'm just being real. Because we face stuff in life, right? And the scars come and the hurts come. And there's times that we forget and we wonder where the love of God is. Our flesh cries out. Our flesh tells us different things. I talked to someone this morning that is in a real battle with thoughts of just wanting to give up. Not to the point of harming, but to the point of just not knowing what to do. Almost to the point of, I think, desperation. And so we just need to be reminded of this. I'm going to ask you right now, just close your eyes. Would you close your eyes and bow your head? And if you need to be reminded today, if you're at that point to where you think that, I don't see God, I don't see His love, I I'm confused, I'm going through some stuff, and I just don't know what to do. Right now I'm not experiencing the love of God. Would you just slip up your hand? I'm not going to embarrass you or call you out. Just put your hand up. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you. Thank you. Put your hands down. In 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Father, you have seen those hands today. Lord, I'm asking you to do something very, very supernatural. Lord, would you find ways today, I'm asking you to do this today, to find things that wherever these guys go, these guys and gals, wherever they go, that there'll be something that they look at that will remind them of your love. That will give them hope, Father. Keep bringing hope and light. And Father, there's things that could happen throughout this week. And in the coming weeks, or maybe right now, we think we don't need to be reminded of your love, but the world plays games with us. And Lord, I've been alive for 56 and a half years. And for a good portion of that, I've tried to follow you with my heart. But I know, Lord, that there comes times where my flesh wants me to cry out and say, God, where are you? So, Father, would you prepare our hearts for when that happens? Jesus said that we're going to have trials and troubles in this world. So when that happens, Lord, prepare our hearts today. So when that happens, we might remember just a very simple message that was given on July 15th, 2018, to remind us of the love of God and how you woke someone up to simply talk and give a simple message about the love of God. Father, we bless you and we praise you and we rejoice in your name. In Jesus' name, amen. One of the good